And we are live. Dave, how you doing today?
Great. Here we are once again. Excited to dive in.
Yeah.
Welcome to the Business Velocity through the Five Facets of Business podcast, where your journey to accelerated success begins. We're your hosts, Dave Newell and Hannah Panuski, where in each episode we dive deep into the five facets of business through conversations with business leaders. Whether you're a startup or a seasoned business leader, understanding how to harness these facets can transform your operations and propel your growth. With our guests, we explore actionable insights and share stories of real businesses with real people that have achieved remarkable results. Let's unlock the potential of your business together and achieve business velocity. Hannah, as always, who's our guest today?
Let's do it. Yeah, today we are talking to Logan Miller. Logan is an experienced brand strategist with a passion for helping organizations grow with great intention. He began his career as a freelance branding consultant, focused primarily on brand planning and development projects with local nonprofits and small businesses, while partnering with established marketing agencies to accelerate his learning on larger projects with bigger budgets and broader scopes of work. It was during this time that Logan established his great love for networking and his ironclad belief that the tone and likely trajectory of any project is solidified at the strategy table. After graduating from business school, Logan launched Imperative Partners, where he leads marketing teams on a wide range of projects, serving a diverse client base, employing a best teams program structure. Logan takes a highly collaborative approach to client service, managing a book of business that is roughly equal parts nonprofit and for-profit clientele of varying sizes. Logan was raised in Memphis, Tennessee, but is now based in Charlotte, which I believe is how you two know each other. Logan, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks, Hannah. I appreciate it. Love being here. Dave, how are you doing, man?
Hey, man. Good to meet you. Logan and I had the fortune of meeting, I don't know, 5-7 years ago at this point in time,
That's right.
through a local CEO roundtable group. And I was thinking, man, there's probably, and we've hung out a little bit. He's been to the farm. We've had a chainsaw in his hand over here before.
That's right.
So
Chop down a few trees.
cut down a few trees. So we've definitely had some fun together, known each other for a long time. Logan is one of my go-tos when it comes to brand and strategy, but I know he's a Duke grad, so I have to ask, because in North Carolina, this is a hot topic. If you're a Duke fan, NC State, we'll throw NC State in there, or UNC. So, how does that show up in your life when you have to deal with the fact that you're a Duke grad in a state that cares a lot about Duke UNC?
Listen, how does it show up? It never goes away. It's a mainstay. It's constant, but it's also it's a joy, man. Speaking of brand, Duke, we are of course a historical basketball school, but in the recent years have made some waves in football, and so it became a conversation internally. I say internally, but amongst fans and alum. What's going to happen if we really get good at football, and is that gonna be sort of a conflict of interest and identity crisis, if you will. But and then of course the big transition with basketball right now, coaches. But daily life. I mean, there is one thing about Charlotte. Duke is the wrong shade of blue for Charlotte, if you want to go with the majority, but there is a Duke Carolina component. It seems to be at almost every level of leadership and social and cultural, from fans to business leaders to folks making waves in philanthropy. So I enjoy the rivalry. I don't enjoy being outnumbered, but I could easily go back to campus if I want to.
If you want to feel,
wash myself in the right shade.
There you go.
There you go. Well, yeah, we are curious to talk to you today about branding and personal branding. So my first question for you, so a little bit about me. I got a degree in theater. I also got a minor in history. I am very new to the whole marketing world. My dynamic on our team, I focus actually on process development. So like I'm a big fan of leading a team in like order and structure and documentation and project management systems. But again, not so much in marketing. So
Right.
for anybody who doesn't know, like myself, what is personal branding? What is involved in branding in general?
Okay. Well, we'll start with business branding first, since that's what everyone is referring to mostly when they say branding.
Okay.
So it's branding is building a distinct identity for your business in the eyes of your target audience and the general public. So that's a multifaceted kind of approach. A lot of active points there. So the distinctive identity piece has to do with competition and differentiating from the folks you're competing against. That's
Mhm.
where distinct comes in. Identity comes into self-awareness of what it is that you're trying to do, a collective awareness, I guess, in this case, what the employees are doing, how they're coming together. And then target audience is a whole separate thing, because if you do those first two things well, but you're pointing it at the wrong group, then you're leaving money on the table at best, or maybe even you'll draw dead. So I think, thinking of those three things is authenticity. Who are we? Who are we competing against? Because that's important for you to reverse engineer sort of, an analogy, or I guess not an analogy, but a picture I like to paint is, so we are all expert consumers. So Hannah, you may not be a marketer per se, but you are an expert at, looking at things and deciding what you want, and what stands out and what resonates and what doesn't. And so I think if we can, even if we have to work with a professional like myself as business owners, if we can reverse engineer that consumer expertise, then we can start to tease away things and not oversimplify, because we do have a tendency, I would say, and I say we, including myself, we oversimplify things when we're in the driver's seat, and we just have this disconnect between how we make decisions when we're consumers. And so what that looks like is a brand's origin story can resonate with us as consumers, and we'll even share it with others, which is what we want as business owners.
Oh,
but
yeah.
then when it comes to running our own business, we tend to be very business-based, bottom line, point A to point B. And we don't think the origin story matters as much because we know it so well. But, like I just said, it plays on us sometimes. There's a reason why it's, if it's done right, it's on the wall, or it's easy to find when you go into a business.
Yeah, absolutely.
It works.
Yeah.
We were talking about this the other day with a guest who does brand work as well. One of the things I found really interesting in that conversation was, when we think about, well, we got to create a brand story or a brand narrative, or like, how are we going to create, even as something as simple as like, what are we doing in this advertisement, right? And so often it is like, here's their pain, here's what they want, here's what they should do. Right. And it's like, that's pretty clean. Like, that makes sense. That's how the human brain works. Cool. We got it. But also it can come across as really transactional. And sometimes as the business owner trying to get somebody to purchase something, we're almost making the assumption that the first time they interact with us, we have this like magical potion formula that all of a sudden it's like, they're going to buy, right? Because they read that one thing that we wrote that one time.
Right.
Like, so when we think about like, well, I wrote this LinkedIn post and nobody signed up for my program, or I wrote this LinkedIn post and nobody bought my thing. Like,
that's right.
Well, yeah, it's because it was the first time they interacted with you, right? So like, when you bring in the origin story, talk a little bit about just kind of like how brand plays out over time, right? Like maybe the relationship between the target market, the story, the logo, like all that stuff, but how does it play out over time?
No, that's excellent distinction. So I would say being overly transactional is something that I see, and a good way to think about that is building a relationship as people. The first time you have a quick conversation with someone, line at the grocery store, mutual friend connected you or something like that, you don't go tell someone that's your best friend after that first conversation. You may leave with a good feeling. You might not even take an action about going to coffee or going to lunch, but you may leave with the thought the seed is planted. And fast forward 2 years later, You guys seen each other 15, 20 times. You have a good relationship. That is what it's like in business. Very much a marathon. Should be relational. That is the high bar goal. If you can get someone to buy from you once, we'll consider that a win. But businesses is, their level. So we'll buy from you once. Repeat purchases. Brand advocate. I repeat purchase and I tell my friends and family. And so the higher you go, the more relational matters. And so to your point, Dave, you tell the story, but you don't expect the story to work necessarily for the purchase or for the brand advocacy, but you are planting the seed. So I often tell folks that we could talk about 50 things that you should do to set your brand up for success, large and small. And at the end of the day, if you isolate any one of those things, it's very easy to say, oh, well, it's only this, it's only a flyer, it's only a footer photo, it's only a page on a website. But all the brands that we know and love, it's the cumulative effect of all of those things working. And so if you don't take a step back and look at the whole board, all the pieces on the board, then you really do run the risk of getting too overly myopic and just too narrow focus. So it's about the brand. It's about showing up in all the places that you own digitally. So that's your website. That's your email listserv that you can reach out to with the click of a button. Very high ROI there. And then that's the earned media. That's the PR stuff. That's the social. And to your point, Dave, you got to tell the same story in all of those places. All we're doing is we're taking that origin story and that brand mix with your logo and colors and all of your key messages, and we're just basically making it modular for all of these, from this all the way up to a billboard, all the way, every size in between, flyers and all of this. It's the same exact story. It should feel the same. It should look the same. And it is very difficult to do, even if you're a marketer, for yourself, because we get emotional about it and we make ourselves the exception. And so we do things differently when it's us versus sticking to the best practices.
Well, I would say too, if you're like, as the person in our company who's, responsible for driving in many ways the external story. I'm not responsible for all the mechanics of it all the time, but kind of the overarching story. I will say one of the things that I run into as a challenge is I have a lot of ideas and I'm like, oh, we should do that. We should do that. We should do that. We should tell that story. Right. And then if we're not disciplined about, asking the question, like, well, does that story, like if we're going to promote that, does that line up with this story? And this, I will admittedly say I'm not always good at. But you can run the risk of, well, everything, like you said, has the risk of kind of running in isolation. If it runs in isolation but doesn't pattern match the other things that you have,
right?
Now you're creating confusion, or you're creating like, wait, weren't they doing this thing? Like they said they're doing this, now they're doing this. That doesn't make sense. Like if that doesn't make sense to somebody, or they can't find you, you're kind of creating a scenario where, the folks that are trying to build a relationship with you, or even want to build a relationship with you as a brand, can't, because you're just confusing.
I agree with that. And I will add to that, I guess, how do I say this? You guys know when you're, when you search for something and then you go check your email and then Google's advertising the very thing you search for in your email box. That's based, we call that retargeting or remarketing. It's the digital version of what Dave was just talking about a few minutes ago. People need to see it and hear it more than once. People say 5 times at minimum on average, and then 7 times max to take an action. And so to think you're going to build it and have them just come is a farce. And then, to your other point, Dave, around focus, I am an ideas guy myself. The good side is that it's fun and you're never at a loss for ideas, but The downside is where to focus.
Yeah.
where to focus and what to build. And I don't have that problem when I am in client service and helping clients, but I do have that problem every time I'm thinking about something for myself.
Well, yeah, that's kind of the question that's sitting with me. So I feel like for any small business leaders who are listening to this, you have so many ideas and different ways it could go, different colors you could use, different fonts, different or different versions of the origin story you could tell. How would you coach someone on finding the one to stick with? Like, how do you decide? How do you kind of maybe you're starting to build your brand, but how do you know when it's ready to be shared?
No, that's great. That's great. So when it comes to origin story, I would say go with inner resonance, whatever you write down that feels the best, and then tweak along the way, because we're not, whatever you put out the first time, a few folks might see it, but I'm of the fail fast and cheap, line of thinking. So you put out a brand story and you need to trim that down before the masses see it. It'll be right, but that first iteration should come sort of from the heart, and then you work within best practices to not make it overly long, or to use this word versus that word as a synonym, or not repeat words, or make this sentence short followed by a long one followed by another short one. So those types of things apply to pretty much across the board. But the authenticity piece, I think it's more of an art than a science, Hannah, on the story. But on the colors, that's more of a best practice. I mean, if you were a bank, you probably aren't looking at pink or, orange, or, I mean, you could be, but mostly probably red or blue. And with some accent colors that are different. Why? Because blue is trust and red is power. And these colors mean things. Yellow is always going to be exciting. Orange is always going to be exciting. Green is always going to be sustainability or growth. So those are best practices you can nail down. But then also, listen, especially as small business owners. I mean, of course, small business, I always laugh at this, but the small business definition goes way higher than you would think small business goes. But I'm assuming we're not talking about those guys, or what is it, 5,000 employees or something? I'm more so talking about the small businesses that, serve a bunch of folks online, or some folks regionally and locally, in the native environment. We can strategically break rules. And so if your favorite color is pink, and you are doing financial literacy as a consultant, hey, listen, if you find your target audience and they can see you from that, then you may get the benefit of extra differentiation on the other side of that unique strategic rule break there. And that would be a case for inner resonance rising above best practice, because I can give you examples all day where that has worked. So I wish I could give you a firmer answer, Hannah, but it's art versus science for a lot of these things. There are best practices that, when all else fails, you do those to the letter and you'll be fine. But the secret sauce is always with a little bit of feel in it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What about so we talked about kind of specifics of what a brand looks like, but in your work that you've done with companies, when does it veer into so oftentimes if you're developing a brand, let me rephrase this. When you're developing a brand, you are also developing the company itself. You're probably also developing the products and the things that you are offering.
That's true.
So where do you try and draw a line with the clients that you work with, or do you venture into helping them design also the product, the business itself? Where is that line, when you're developing brand with the actual product and stuff?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's in theory, I see how it could go either way, but in practice, it's not as much chicken or the egg as it sounds, because as a business owner, you don't know what you'll be doing a certain amount of years down the road. So you can't think product first and then I'll fit the brand into that, because the brand's larger than anything you sell or anything that you do, because that could change. So you could keep, let's say, the flagship product in mind, but that only comes at the very, very high marquee. Like, you would put Ford Motor Company because you're never going to be doing anything other than that category. But you wouldn't put Ford this specific type of engine because that's too specific and it doesn't leave you the flexibility. And so I would say brand first, and then think about your products and services, because your brand is more about, it's more intangible. I mean, we talked about if you think about website, business cards, flyers, add specialty stuff, stickers, vehicle wraps, all of that stuff. Those are destinations. Anything can go on those things. It's the intangibles of what you say, what you based it on, the colors. That's really what the mix is. It presents tangibly, but it's the heart of it is very much intangible.
Well, and maybe tied to that, like when you say product or service, is something that even attention that we're running into a little bit is you see brands that, let's say they have like a dynamic leader. I think this happens a lot in the coaching space, in the consulting space, in the fractional space, like folks like yourself, folks like us, right? Where, we present as thought leaders in the space. And so you often have this, well, do we present the business as a business? Do we present Dave, or do we present Logan? Or, like you have kind of this conflict in my mind between like personal brand and company brand, small businesses in particular, right? Where it's like a little harder to do that if you're Pepsi or Ford. Like, of course, you're just so well known that you're like this monstrous company or whatever it is. But like when you're a small company, or you're localized, or you've got a niche market, that's decently small, often the brand becomes synonymous with the person who's running that company. How do you navigate those waters? Like what's a best practice that you've seen, or what's a good approach that you've seen that you think works, or what have you seen that's failed? Any and all of the above.
Well, I'll start with folks that are starting out from like a zero standpoint, because if you buy a business, that changes. If you are partnering, that changes. But if you're starting a business and it's day one for that business, to your point, the person and the business are interchangeable. Essentially, you are either the service you provide or your lead product. The business is one and the same. And as the product grows, the business should outgrow the product or the service that's being. So it's the business should have a higher growth rate in the minds of folks than the product. Otherwise, you run the risk of being a one-trick pony, or having a business that can't outgrow you, or that you can't get out of, you can't divorce yourself from. If I did Logan Miller branding consultants and every client wanted Logan Miller at the table, then I'm inherently limited. I can't send anyone else I hire, even if they're better than me. And so it's about, it's okay to be one of one as you start, but I think you need to start leaning into the business side a little more versus the personal brand or the any one product or service. There are a few ways to do that. One would be, let the business be the thought leader and not necessarily yourself. You're inherently a subject matter expert, but if your business had a blog versus you posting all of your thoughts on your LinkedIn, well, now your business is getting that thought equity and that reputation for being an expert. And it's like how I don't want to use an example that's too local. But there are a couple marketing companies here locally that people say the name Ray Ward, Boone Oakley. You don't think of the individuals, you think of the company, even though Boone and Oakley are two people. But that business couldn't be as big as it is if you needed to see one of those two guys at the table, because honestly, the bigger a business becomes, the more the person that started or the visionary or the owner is more doing the relationship building and then passing it off to integrators. And you need to be able to do that if you're going to grow.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But I will say, because you mentioned personal brand, and I you know, I get a lot of questions around like, well, I've been thinking about my personal brand and I don't really know, what the next step is there. And so we've been talking a lot about business branding. Is it okay if we pivot over into personal brand a little bit and lean
Yeah,
into that?
absolutely. Yeah.
Are you asking us?
I am because I know whose house I'm at. I'm in the house of I'm at the house of five facets. So I just want to be a good house guest. So
There you go.
so
You're a good guest.
okay, cool. So look, a personal brand, your experiences, your skills, and your values. And it can start off as what you do. That's the easiest. But then I guess the other concentric circle I would say for folks that are building great personal brands is who you do it with, or who you do life with, who you do business with, who you do your causes with. And then the biggest one is what you believe. That's the biggest circle. If you can get folks to go way out to what you believe, then that is Dave and I were talking a couple of days ago, and funny enough, not sure why, but Al Gore came up. And we were talking about how, we know what he does or what he did politically. And we sort of knew what his politics were and sort of like who he did it with and who he aligned with. But then he's almost become more synonymous with climate change as even he has with politics.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that is what I mean. If you can get folks out to that circle about what you believe, I mean, we've been believing in things since we were, since before we were walking. You know what I mean? And so that's more native to who we are than what we've been doing as adults and who we do it with. Both of those are very important. But so I would say the high water mark is you can get folks to believe in those two things I said, but also what you believe. You are really cooking with something. And what is that going to do for you? It's going to build credibility in the eyes of the folks that you want to target. It's going to give you flexibility to do different things and not just the one thing folks know you for. We all know people who are reached I'm not going to name names on this one, but we know people who have reached the epitome of success in their field, but seem to always want to do this other thing that maybe the public won't let them do. Sometimes people do surprise us and they get to be the rapper turned actor or vice versa, basketball player turned rapper or something like that. But for the most part, if we get pigeonholed, then we can't get out of that. So how do we do it? Well, we lead with the personal brand, and not just to Dave's earlier point, when we have something to sell, because that's too transactional and it won't work. Of course, it works with your career. Here's something I found too. It attracts opportunities. So you put out that belief system and folks will find you. And they come and they come leaned in already, versus if someone comes to my website and they read things about me and they send me a note, they're going to be listening from a, does this check all my boxes? Whereas if they've consumed a lot of what I believe and they believe what I believe, or they're interested in what I believe, I think they come leaned in a bit more. And it's like, how can we work together versus should we work together? And I guess the other two I would say is the right folks. So attracting the right people, because if I project something, that does two things. It attracts folks who believe that, but it also repels people who don't. And so we don't have to be at the table to figure that out. If I'm projecting this, and then here's the biggest benefit, and it's gonna sound cheesy and corny and all the things, but in order to build an effective personal brand, you have to have a high degree of self-awareness. And self-awareness is the absolute, we are not even talking about business anymore. Self-awareness is the best gift that you can give yourself.
Absolutely.
And so it's just one more incentive to dig down deep and discover who you are. And who you want to be.
Oh yeah, absolutely, for sure. I think there's so much value that it offers your life and also your business and then your team if you understand and know yourself. I think
Agree.
Dave mentioned before we started the recording that we spoke with someone in our last episode who specializes in managing ego, and
Mm,
so her work is all about helping people see themselves and see that ego part of themselves,
hard work.
and it's so powerful, and so that affects the brand of the person that's doing it. That affects the working life of the person who's doing it, is like
Agree.
analyzing these parts of yourself, understanding it better, and then being able to reflect it. um are
Yeah.
there like exercises and things that you try and get people to do to sort of become more self-aware or like brand aware, if I can blend those two together?
There are a lot of it is just being honest reflection
Yeah,
will go a long way. And of course, honest has a caveat to it because we can probably only be so honest with ourselves, because we have blind spots. So then
sure.
what, how do you get around those? There are people who there are a couple experts in Hannah and Dave and Logan. There are a couple family members and friends and colleagues that are virtually experts in dealing with us. And if we ask them honest questions and say, hey, what would you say my um, three best qualities are? Hey, what would you say makes me the most different from all of your other friends? Or what makes me the most different in the family? Well, you may be surprised by what you hear, and conversely, what you hear may confirm or affirm what you already believe. So those are two tricks. Often, and I keep using this phrase inner resonance, and I realize that's not a common phrase probably, but it just means when I hear something externally, it will just feel differently when it aligns with my deep values.
Hmm.
And we've all felt that play out. We've all seen that play out. And so if you focus your reading on things that have to do with personal branding, you'll pick up things. If you read, personally, I like reading biographies and autobiographies. You pick up a lot there because those folks are being introspective, and so then it makes you think about your own thinking. um and so here's a blockage that I see a lot too. Folks don't want to build their personal brand, not don't want to, but they hesitate to because they feel like it's bragging. And
Mm.
that is could not be further from the truth. You are not telling folks what you're good at. You're telling folks what you're passionate about and where you spend most of your time. And then they'll determine if you're good at it or not. And that's because they'll patronize you or they won't. um you being good at something is not a matter of what you think or even what you do. It's a matter of what you do as it relates to who you're competing against.
Mhm,
You know what I mean?
mhm,
And so that being the case, I wouldn't hesitate to build a personal brand based on bragging because it has nothing to do with bragging at all. And it also, I'll touch on one more thing because it's all kind of coming to me in a wave now. Another thing I hear a lot is, well, my reputation's set already, so how could I build
mhm,
a personal brand? And so that's wrong as well, in my opinion, because a personal brand and a reputation, they can align, but they can also diverge. So it's best to look at them separately. I fully in control of what I put out as my personal brand. I am not in control of what my reputation is.
mhm.
You know what I mean? That
Yeah,
is perception. That is the moment in time that you caught me. You doing something, you meet me on a bad day, my reputation means something different to you than my mom, who is a lot more credible, um who, as it were, thinks I'm incredible, I think. um so
At least some days, yeah.
um well, a couple more things about that. A personal brand is selective in what you choose to share because we're
mm,
so complex and deep people, all of us. There's no way we could share everything. You share too much and you share nothing at all because
oh,
people won't
sure.
retain anything, right? So a reputation is broad. It's based on a lot of things, a lot of experiences. a personal brand, we can quickly change it. A reputation is more rigid, slow changing. Once it's set, it's going to be set probably. And, you know, I kind of said this already, but a personal brand is more narrow focus and reputation is broader.
Yeah.
So that's your incentive to do it today. I heard this guy say, well, isn't a personal brand what people, you're talking to 4 people, one person knows you, the other 2 don't. Whatever they say about you when you walk away, isn't that your personal brand? No, that's whether you had a good conversation, bad conversation just then. That's whether that person, the mutual friend, had something good or bad to say about you. That's
just gossip.
That's just gossip.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just gossip.
That's just gossip.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've seen this at networking events. I've done a ton of networking events, and I've done it in spaces where like personal brand is like everything. And like, I have seen it play out in real time where someone who I know has a pretty distinctive personal brand, to your point, like we'll follow the example, like leaves a conversation and then is talked about in a very contradictory way to what they present to the world.
Yeah.
They probably don't have a lot of self-awareness.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And you know, that just means that they have some development to do, but they can do it and they can change it.
Could absolutely do it. I agree, Hannah. And frankly, you know, people around you who genuinely know who you are personally and professionally, and also will tell you the truth. Magical. I mean, it will pay dividends over and over and over and over again. I was thinking, someone once said, I was sharing with someone last week that so if you think in terms of concentric circles, most people fit in one of the other and not in both. And that's either care about you personally, but don't understand what you do. And that's, you know, parents or a sibling or something like that, or some childhood friends you grew up with who just didn't take the same career trajectories you did, or that kind of thing. Or folks that understand what you do, but don't care about you personally. That's a lot of clients, a lot of colleagues, folks you're competing against, that kind of thing. And you really can't do much with either one of those when it comes to self-awareness and transparency and vulnerability and leaning in. But there is a, you know, Venn diagram here where this little piece in the middle, there are folks that care about you personally and understand what you do. And for me, Dave's one of those people. And I have another small handful of people. And Dave, I mean, you know, I can't speak for you, but I can say that our conversations are always very deep and rich and rewarding because of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, and I think this was another good one, right? I mean, appreciate you being on. One of the things that I heard you say, without, I think, using these terms, but you and I have talked about this before, is, you know, you talked about that belief circle, right, for personal branding, but I also think that's true on the company side. And I know you and I have talked about that before, right?
Yeah.
You can get people to buy into that belief side, but in order for them to get into the belief side, you actually have to have a perspective, right? And I think perspective, you know, we like to differentiate between opinion and perspective. Opinion is, hey, I'm reacting to something, I'm seeing something, I have like my initial thought or my initial experience, like I think this about this, right?
Yeah.
Where perspective is, I've thought about this, I've gotten deeply into it, like I'm really thinking about this, I have some degree of expertise, or I at least have enough lived experience where I have a very concrete thought, and I understand both sides of that coin, and I'm picking this one, right? I'm picking left over right. And I think when you have perspective, you're stating a belief. And I think people are attracted to that, right? Like not everybody's going to share your perspective. And that's kind of the point, right? It's kind of the point to be able to say, and not ostracizing, not saying my opinion is better than your opinion, my perspective is better than your perspective. It's just, this is how I see it. Do you see it the same way? If so, come on in. If you don't, hey, there's hundreds and thousands of other people that think the other direction. There, you might not be for me and I might not be for you. And I think that's okay. And I think as a business, we often overstate, like we want to be for everybody all the time and always. As a small business, it's like, that's just ineffective. Like there's nothing for people to grab onto at that point in time, right? If you're for everybody, you're not really for everybody at that point.
Totally. I completely agree with you. Could not agree more between perspective and opinion. Um, we all know whether we are vegan, vegetarian, no matter what our religious beliefs are, we know what Chick-fil-A stands for. We know. I mean, they're competing against, fast food places that are open 7 days a week, and they choose to be open 6. And so no matter what you feel about the company or anything that they've done or said over time, that's a stake in the ground. I don't care who you are, and you're staking it on beliefs. If we want to see some cheap opinions, man, we could just go to under any Instagram post. You know what I mean? Like,
Yep.
the comment section is rife with cheap opinions and
All the time.
and fleeting and all over the place. So certainly perspective, very time tested, proven, much more credible. And that is, so to just tie a bow on that, Dave, belief system is the outer concentric circle of personal brand, whereas core values is the outer concentric circle of a business. That's when you put the stake in the ground on what you believe and honestly what you don't, because strategy is, we have this saying, you can't outperform bad strategy. And so that is strategies it's just as much about what you leave out as what you put in, and that's the same for a belief system.
Yep,
absolutely. Well, be careful, because Dave might steal what you just said.
Yeah, that's really good. I like that.
No, that's really good. Yeah, thank you so much for being with us today.
I'll give credit.
Of course,
no problem, Dave. I steal from you all the time. We have a mutual understanding.
Yeah, man. Likewise.
Good. Yeah, thank you so much for joining us today, Logan. It was so nice to meet you.
Great to meet you as well.
Thank you for all of your wisdom and insight and thoughts on branding. Where can people find you if they want to connect with you?
Oh, find me on LinkedIn, please. That is, are we going to have a link somewhere, or should I just spell it out?
We'll put a link to your LinkedIn in the show notes.
Yeah, connect with me on LinkedIn, and I will accept you, and we can chase some messages and talk some business.
Awesome. Sounds good. Well, thank you so much, Logan. Have a good rest of your day.
All right. See y'all. It was fun.
Thanks. Yeah, I find brand really fascinating, especially like in our day and age. I mean, you talked about, you can find cheap stuff in the comments on Instagram. Everybody, and I mean, I'm in my early 30s. I'm a millennial. Everyone talks about like, what's my personal brand? And people younger than me are talking about that all the time. And it's something that I don't sit and think about often, but his bringing up, the difference between your personal brand and your reputation just really got me thinking, like, I don't know, just sitting and analyzing that, like, what is the difference for me personally,
Yeah. Yeah. It's super interesting. I mean, every time I go to the beach with the family or whatever, and I see, somebody taking 47 pictures that, is going on Instagram or TikTok or whatever afterwards, it's like, you can see how hard they're trying to appease somebody.
Yeah.
Right? Whoever that somebody is, whether that's their audience or maybe it's themselves, I don't know. But
yeah,
every time I see that, I get this little bit of like, you're trying too hard, as opposed to like really getting into this, this is just what I am. This is my perspective, and I'm going to embrace it. And I'm going to find the people that want to embrace that with me. And I think, to Logan's point, there's a personal version of that. And there's a business version of that. And I think what I keep, we've now had a few conversations with folks in the brand strategy space, or the brand architecture space. And I feel like it's just a thread that has been kind of getting pulled through, right? Is like, perspective really matters. Like, know what you stand for, know what you don't stand for, and be okay with it. Don't be a jerk about it. Don't tell other people they're wrong, but know what you stand for, know what you don't stand for, and have that clear distinction. And folks will know what they're saying yes to.
Yeah. And craft it. I mean, the example that you just gave of somebody taking photos on the beach, yes, they're trying very hard, but they are trying to craft something that they then present to the world very intentionally. Yeah. And I do think that corporate brands should take a page out of that book. I mean, if you go take 100 selfies on a beach, like, maybe that is your marketing work for the day, if you're some kind of, fitness expert or something like that, or what have you. So I do think that it takes intention to develop a brand that's really clear. Know yourself, but then also craft all those materials so that they are really succinct and clear, and they deliver the brand in a unified way. You know, Logan also talked about having unification, everything from business cards to billboard. It all does need to look and feel the same way. And something else, you know, that I think we got close to too was just like how so many unspokens can be communicated as well if you know who you are as a brand and you communicate it, because people are going to like pick up on that. Like, we are smart consumers. We can read between the lines. We can choose something is for us or not for us. So don't be afraid to like communicate pieces of it that are critical, and trust your audience, because they're gonna choose what they want and what they're not gonna want.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, was excited to have him on. Really good conversation. Really good guy. Absolutely check him out. Connect with him on LinkedIn. You
Yeah,
won't
for
regret.
sure. For sure. Thank you for joining us on Business Velocity. Today's insights are just the beginning of enhancing your business's momentum. Don't forget to subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get podcasts for more episodes that will help turn your potential into performance. You can also check out the 5 Facets of Business, our framework, at theevolveddifference.com. And remember, the time is now to take these strategies, apply your learning, and achieve business velocity. We'll see you next time.